Hello there, YouTube. Back at it again. Not much has changed since the last time I made a video. Earlier today, I went over to my local Dunks, jumped on the Wi-Fi, and I did scroll some job searching stuff, and I have to say, I hate Indeed, the website for finding jobs. I hate ZipRecruiter, the website for finding jobs, and I hate LinkedIn, a social media thing for finding jobs or connecting with people. The jobs that I did notice online, they all just didn't seem worth doing, if that makes any sense. Like, I couldn't see myself doing those jobs. I didn't care to do those jobs, And, I'm in this state right now where I'm trying to decide whether I need to pull the trigger and just completely abandon society completely, and then go off into some area that nobody goes, Like, one of the ideas I have is, what if I go to some of those areas that are like along highways that nobody actually looks through? You're driving and you're like watching Netflix or you're listening to the radio and nobody cares what's happening on, the side of the road there, what's behind the trees, and, I considered like just living out there, and well, right now I can't afford a tent, I don't even have money for that. So I was thinking about, going old-fashioned and primitive, building a stick shelter, making tools out of like stone and sticks, and making cordage, a special type of rope out of like fibers, plants, and stuff like that. Making a tree house, making some sort of water system. Water is the big issue that I haven't figured out yet. I've been like looking up what they did back in the day, because water purification is going to be important, and water collection is also going to be important. And some of the research that I did, what they did back in the day, they would like dig a hole, kind of like a trench, and they would wait overnight, and then dew would collect in it, and then they would collect the water from that. Because I don't have access to stuff to make a well or make a well. They did make wells back in the day, so I guess it's possible. I was thinking more of a, one of the pump things that brings water to the surface. But I suppose the well would work too. It'd be a lot of work, of course. And I know that a lot of people nowadays, they're moving into their vans or into their cars, or they are buying land and living off-grid. And, I had considered it. I mean, if I don't have money for a tent, I don't have money for land, straight up. But, well, I think that they are on to something there. The problem is, if they buy land, they still have to rent the land. So they still need an income to rent the land that they're living on, I mean, me personally, I'm just like, fuck all that noise, Like, I mean, I'm angry, I feel like I'm been oppressed my entire life by different entities, by my parents, when I was young, and then by society when I'm older, and I can't point at any one single individual and say, it's your fault, and and I can't even like look up at like all these other people, and there's nobody to get mad at because it's like such a collective problem. You know, I thought about like, well, just saying, fuck that, I'm just gonna do my own thing, you know, like even as far as like saying, you know, just write my death certificate, you know, and just like completely just like go off grid, you know, learn how to build solar panels. I've been like looking into that, you know, apparently solar panels are made out of silicone, which is made out of a sand. So if I can turn sand into silicone and turn silicone into plates, I mean, the entire process is way too dynamic that I can't actually do it, you know, with sticks and stones. Unfortunately, it requires, you know, more advanced procedures, which I don't have access to. One of the ideas that I had was to make bricks, you know. First I would like take a bunch of dirt and then I would sift it, and, you know, then I would take a water source and then I would like rinse it out, or, well, rinsing isn't the right word, more of separating the soil from the clay to collect all the clay that I could. And based on what I saw, that's a very tedious process. But, you know, once I have enough clay, then I can turn them into brick shapes. And after I make them brick shapes, they have to dry for a while. But after they dry for a while, then I can like heat them in a crucible. I saw a video on that, but I still need to do more extensive research. But, you know, once I make the bricks, then I can make a brick house. So, you know, I'm thinking about the Three Little Pigs, and this pig made a house of sticks. The sticks got blown down. What was the next one? Shoot. I know the last one was bricks. I also considered, like, you know, making a dugout, you know, just like digging a hole in the ground and like doing something like that. It's an idea. Apparently that's how the storm cellars were. Not the storm cellars. Hello, mousey, mousey, mousies. You found the food I left you, huh? They're so cute. But back in the day, before they had refrigerators, because I was trying to figure that out too, what they would do is they would dig holes in, like, at the root of like trees or whatever, and in the winter they would like pack snow in those holes. And I guess that this, if it's like far enough down, it like stays cold and it doesn't melt. I still need to do more research on that because, you know, sources are limited. Can't really find too much. But thought about like starting a garden. But in the back of my head, I know that this is only like a temporary thing because at any point, you know, some official can come along and say, you're not allowed to be here. You're not paying rent. You're not paying the U.S. military, you know? Stuff like that, you know, trying to pay the U.S. military for our planes and our guns and, you know, how we oppress other governments and overthrow them and, you know, fracture their economy so we can stay the top dog, you know. All over the place, you know. And I've like considered this a lot, you know, but I've got like half-hearted comes to mind, but, you know, 1 foot in, 1 foot out, you know, and I need to do something, you know. And I've been talking to an AI, and, you know, it's telling me that I need to stop waiting for permission, you know. I need to choose the direction and move in it. And, you know, I said that, you know, I'm trying, you know, I am trying everything I can think of, you know, and nothing's working. You know, and I don't want it to seem like I'm just like waiting around or something. You know, I am thinking, and I get that thought paralysis trap or whatever. Anyway, as I like think about it, and you know, it would be interesting, keep me busy for a while. I don't know if I'd survive the winter if I just like, completely went off grid like that, you know, and, thought about like starting a garden. And, I'm thinking that I want to move to a vegetarian type lifestyle, because I just feel simply awful for all of quote unquote livestock. You know, they're bred, you know, they're born to die. And, I just think that's evil, you know. Just like, how would I feel if I was a cow? I was just born, and there was like 6 of us in one parking space, you know. Like, think about the parking spaces that you go to at like grocery stores or, anywhere, you know, any plaza. And they stuff 6 cows in there. And then they take like the radioactive remains from, what was it? Like gasoline or gas making procedures or nuclear waste or something, and they feed the cows that, and they like pump them full of like antibiotics and like growth hormones and make them hulking and huge so they can barely like stand under their own weight. And they want to make them as efficient as possible, and then they're slaughtered. And I don't know exactly how. I don't know if they know that they're about to die as they get like herded into somewhere and like have their heads chopped off. That final moment. Are they just like all in a line and they just get their heads chopped off? And then they get their bodies carved up. And the same for like chickens and stuff like that. And I was thinking about, and I'm sorry if I'm, really putting a damper on things, you know. But I was thinking about cows, specifically the ones that produce milk and stuff. And, milk them for all they're worth. That's a phrase that I didn't put much thought into until just now. So you milk them and you milk them, and they don't produce any more milk, and then you kill them, and then they're just like, well, tossed to the side is not accurate because they get eaten, and I just think it's like barbaric, and it's just like, well, humans are worth more than animals, if you say so. What good do humans actually do? We just pollute the planet, and we make it worse, and we're all about our own like greed, and we're too busy trying to accrue power and glory and other stuff, But thinking about becoming a vegetarian, I'm trying to decide if I want to be a vegetarian or a pescatarian, because I know that some people, they move to pescatarian and they only eat fish, and I somewhat find this idea better, but not so much all the ones that are like, caught in nets. Like, I'm thinking about building a fishing rod and going fishing, and it feels more humane to me, I guess. But I'm not entirely sure. A couple of weeks ago, I had this dream, and there was this fish that was dying, and so I was charged to chop its head off, and I had such a hard time doing it, and honestly, I should have just done it, because it was like, anyway, I struggled to kill the fish, to cook it. So I haven't fully figured out whether or not I can move to a completely like vegan type lifestyle. I think I'm more okay with like eggs from certain chickens, because I learned that, because before, I suppose what I used to think was that we had chickens, and okay, straight up, I thought that chickens were forced to have sex, and then they would they would um, have their babies, and then we would steal their babies, and then when we would eat them, you know. And this this isn't true, by the way. That it's not exactly like that. Apparently, chickens have been uh, genetically modified so that uh, they have period cycles, and during those period cycles, they drop eggs, and it happens daily. So every day they're dropping eggs that are not babies. They're just well, I don't know the full science, but um, uh, so I feel better knowing that. But I also wonder, does it hurt them? Because I feel like it hurts women going through menstrual cycles. So does it is the chicken just in constant pain from going through periods and stuff like that? I don't know. But same with the chicken. Doesn't like eggs anymore, and it gets turned into a chicken pot pie. Have you seen Chicken Run? So, trying to find the balance because, I know that the circle of life is a thing, but when I was a child, and I was like reading science textbooks for fun, for lack of a better thing to do, one of the ideas that I had come up with is when I'm an adult, I'm going to figure out how to genetically print meat, right? So somehow there's going to be like some computer. You know how there's like 3D printing? Well, basically I wanted to make the same thing. I don't even know 3D printing was a thing back then, but I was just like, if it's just all like math and equations and, sequencing and just like, then, surely we can like, find a way to genetically print meat and spare all of the animals that are in the slaughterhouses, and, as an adult, well, I know that they have some solutions like Beyond Meat or something like that, but that's disgusting. I've tried it before. I mean, try it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. I might have just cooked it bad or wrong, or I don't know. I remember I got it from Dunkin' Donuts once when they were doing a promotion for it, and I nearly barfed. I couldn't. But, as an adult, I was also thinking about the cloning process, because we can clone dogs. Okay, which brings up another idea, aside from what I was talking about, but if you have a dog, and your dog dies, but you have the genetic material so you can get the dog cloned, so you get the dog cloned, so it looks exactly like the first dog, but it's not the first dog because it doesn't have the same memories, It is a completely new dog with the same genetic material and makeup, but it is not an actual clone of the dog, not in my eyes anyway. But I was thinking about cloning animals for the meat industry. But I immediately didn't like that idea because, then we're scientifically, breeding animals to die, whether or not those animals have a consciousness. And I know that most people argue that animals don't have consciousness, but I think that's completely bullshit, Like, if a cow, if animals can have friends, and if animals, display feelings, I think that they have a consciousness straight up, I mean, I feel like anything that's living has a consciousness, you know, all animals, great and small, right? Anyway, so, those are some of my thoughts about living, in the wilds, trying to find somewhere that is both far away from people that I will never bother them, but also close enough that I can still have access to, well, it's just like, well, you can't have it both ways. You have to have one or the other. And it's just like, well, I kind of like the internet, and technology and stuff like that, you know, but, I just feel like I'm not allowed to have it on a two-way street, one-way street, whatever, you know. Basically what I'm saying is, if I am trying to more or less forsake society, then I have no right to get any of the things that society offers, types of thing, so, um, more thought has to go into that. Anyway, I'm just like not doing anything but just like staying here and like wasting everybody's time and wasting my grandmother's like resources, and so in lieu of that, I've been also trying to think, how do I reacclimate to society, but in particular, how do I do it different than what I did the previous times? Because none of the previous times that I've tried this have worked, and it looks pretty hopeless, to be honest with you. It seems like the entire thing is an engineered trap, and it's meant to keep people on the bottom and people on the top get wealthier and more powerful. It really is a class system. And like sometimes I'm wondering, when the revolution is going to happen. When are people going to get fed up and realize that, they are paying for their golden cages and how empty and meaningless life is right now? Or maybe that's just my perspective on that, and, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people are living in this matrix, and, I've woken up from it, and, I could try to go around waking other people up from it, but other people don't want to be woken up. They like their dream world just the way it is, I mean, I guess for me, I've always been searching for the magic, and I've always been told that it doesn't exist, magic isn't real, and still I persist, because this mundane world as it is, where everybody is living in a loop, basically living the same day on repeat, living the same week on repeat, just day in, day out, having the same conversations. Oh, what did you have for lunch today? Oh, I had so-and-so. Just like, oh, what TV show are you watching? Oh, I watched this. Just like, oh, did you watch Jeopardy last night? Just like how the news is all, clickbait, there's just like so many problems. It's just like it's like all over the place, and I'm just like not having any of it, because even when I was an electrician and I was making decent money but still struggling because I wasn't making enough money, and parking fees are outrageous, and not to mention continuously buying tools and whatever, all that aside, but even when I was in a quote-unquote better place, I still realized how empty everything was, just like piano lessons were pretty hollow, you go and they want to make you learn all this classical shit that you don't want to learn. It's just like, who cares about Beethoven anymore? And it's just like, I know that people come after me, but I never liked classical music. I think that in your musical journey, learning some classical is important to your overall well-roundedness. So I'm not going to dismiss it completely. But, people that are just playing, classical music and that's it. They spend months and months, working on one specific song to be able to play it perfectly. And just so, like, in a couple weeks when they're not playing it, they forget. Just like, no. You know, and just like when I would, like, go to play video games and, I just didn't, it just felt like a waste of time, Just like the games were good, but they just didn't seem important, And just like online dating, that's a fucking mess. Just like, I regret how much time that I wasted there, And one of the great things about not having the internet now is I have no access to that. And honestly, I think it's done my mental health a world of good. Because, I have no time to waste trying to, do that entire mess. Fucking awful. I mean, if you know, you know. I've only got 4 minutes, and, maybe I'll cover that in a different video. Because I have, like, no intention of, like, actually getting a job at this point. I have no intention of ever making a resume ever again. I think it's a crock of shit, because, back in the day, it was just like people needed to write a resume to make it seem like they were professional. And, just like, what if resume building isn't their forte? It's not their specialty. They're like really good at other things, but they're terrible at writing because they're not an English major. They're a mathematician. And it's just like, well, you have to be a mathematician and you have to be an English major. And so, back in the day, people got smart. They would ask their family members or their friends or people that were good at making resumes to make a resume for them. So, and that worked for a while. And then the internet came along and they made resume builder websites. So people would just go to resume builder websites and that would build it. And now we have AI. So AI will just take the resume and, so it's just like, what is the point of all of this? Not to mention, the resumes go out and nobody even looks at it. They like, I don't know what they look at. As far as I'm concerned, you are just converted into a video game character where, you just have like a profile screen. People can take one look and say, nah, it's just like dating. Swipe left, swipe right, And, I honestly think that employers should have the responsibility to convince you why you should work for their company, But nobody thinks like that, because we're taught that you should feel lucky for the opportunity to work for this company. And it's not, the company is lucky to have you, because at the end of, in the modern age anyway, just like all of us are replaceable in an instant, except at the higher up where people can fuck up all the time and still have their jobs. And what I'm wondering, just like, I'm not really a political person, but I've been getting more and more I've been keeping a watchful eye on politics. And what I don't understand is, why hasn't Trump been fired yet? Just like all of us, we can get fired same day, but for the president, it's an entire impeachment process that lasts months, I mean, I just say vote of no confidence. I was thinking earlier, I've only got like 40 seconds, he reminds me of Alexander the Great. His father was amazing, but the son was a tyrant, and in my opinion, it's the same for Trump, but whatever. That's neither here nor there.